Hey everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel. This is the second video that I've posted in this year, or this past several years, honestly. I started my YouTube channel back in 2015 with mostly gaming content, and although my YouTube channel has evolved a lot in the past 9 years, I kind of want to focus my channel on just content reflecting on my high school experience, on what my college experience may be, and just sort of like an advice channel, or at least some of the videos will be geared towards that. So today I want to talk about some of the things I think I did in high school that helped me get into competitive universities such as Harvard or Princeton, Columbia, Dartmouth, UCLA, and etc. I think that one of the main things that you should focus on when you're trying to learn, like, how do I get into a great university? It's not necessarily, there's no necessarily like a secret formula. So that's why I just want to talk about my personal experiences in high school, like the passions I pursued, and how exactly I articulated it in my extracurricular page and my essays. Because I think reflecting on that, sharing this with all the viewers, and then sort of answering some questions in the comments later on is the best way to like give genuine advice rather than just talking about my stats. Like, that's why this isn't necessarily like a stats video where I cover like my GPA, SAT, AP scores, because those are all very important, but the reality is that most people who apply to T20 or T25 colleges have amazing GPAs. They're usually valedictorians, salutatorians in the top 10% of their class. They also have amazing SATs, amazing AP scores, and you don't need all of that to get into universities, but a lot of students that apply do have those amazing stats. Therefore, I think the most practical way for me to help audiences sort of understand what I think helped me get into all these great universities is just for me to explain my story of like what I wrote about, what I did in high school, and how I pursued it. So you might be wondering then, why am I even watching this video? Why don't I watch someone else just explain their stats? Well, I think, as I mentioned before, this is the best way to genuinely give advice. And also, if you're trying to maximize your GPA, SAT, or AP scores, there's obviously better videos for like tutorials on like how to study for an AP test. I might post more content geared towards that later on, so stay tuned for that. But overall, this video, I'm going to focus on some of my extracurriculars. And before I go into the specific ones I've done, I just wanted to share that I've watched a lot of these kind of videos when I was in high school, and I think there's a bit of a misconception on what kind of extracurriculars you need to do, because a lot of the common advice I see around the internet is that you need to have a peak. And this, I think this is true, but it's articulated and kind of explained in a weird way, because they're basically saying you need to win an Olympic medal in a sport. You have to be the captain of your science Olympiad team and win the nationals. Like, these things will obviously like help get into these universities like tremendously, but it's also like not everyone's gonna get first place. Like, just competing in itself, I think, is fine for all your extracurriculars. So I think when people say you need to have a peak in your application, I think they're mostly talking about your peak of interest and showing your potential rather than actually the results themselves. Like, obviously having awards help, but I personally think that awards, like winning first place and everything, isn't really necessary at all. It just shows potential, but you can show potential in other ways rather than results. And I think that's a misconception a lot of people have. So there's also a lot of different approaches. Like, should I do 20 different extracurriculars, or should I just focus on 3 core ones? Honestly, I think the correct answer is it really depends on the person. And my genuine advice, I would say, is if you're watching this and you haven't entered high school yet, or you're in the beginning stages of high school, try joining a lot of clubs. Like in 9th grade and 10th grade, I personally also like joined a lot of different clubs. And obviously when I became a junior and senior, I didn't stick with all these different clubs, but I think you'll find out what you are interested in, what you actually want to put time into, and what you think is valuable later on for your application or just in your life in general. So for example, there's a lot of very common clubs, and I don't think you should stray away from them, because I joined stuff like Key Club or the National Honor Society, NHS, and these are some of the most standard clubs. Some people say like, oh, avoid them because, I mean, everyone has it on their application. I would say just avoid writing about them too much unless there's something really special, because I eventually became the president of my NHS at my school my senior year, and I became the vice president of my Key Club in senior year. And even though I had these really like great leadership positions, I think that I wrote about other activities I did that I wasn't necessarily a leader in, because they were more unique to my story. And NHS and Key Club are mostly service and volunteering organizations, so it's a great way to get service hours and to meet people from different high schools. But I don't think it's necessarily the best way of like articulating your journey unless something happened at one of these clubs. So what I'm trying to say is that for very common clubs like book club, math team, NHS, key club, I just named some things that I did that were really common. You could definitely write about them. You can definitely put them in your activity list, which is what I did. But I think there should be something more unique part of your central story. So now I'm gonna just talk about some of the extracurriculars I did that I wrote about the most. And again, some of them are very common, some of them are not as common, but that's why I think how common an extracurricular is shouldn't really stop you, because there's a million people that do NHS, there's a million people that play sports, but there's so many different ways that you can kind of express your own reality with those experiences. So I'm just gonna dive into my my own extracurriculars now. All right, so these are a couple of the props that I wanted to show today. I'll start with my table tennis one. So I've been playing table tennis pretty much ever since I was a little kid. My uncle used to play at a very high like national level in Korea many decades ago. And I began to play with him. I played at a club that he used to play at, and it became just like not even a sport, but just sort of like a life hobby that I want to do for the rest of my life, but also like something I do to get my mind off things when I feel confused, or just to like have fun, get some exercise in. And this is a lanyard from my tournament 2 years ago. It's the US Nationals for 2022. It was during the summer, and I was staying in Texas, and I was able to stay at my aunt's house, which is really nice. So I didn't have to like pay for an hotel, which made the trip a lot easier. And we were there for around 7 to 10 days, and the tournament was really exciting. I was able to meet so many different people from all different states and compete with them. And I think that kind of experience was amazing, and I wrote about it in my UC essays. But I didn't really choose to emphasize the fact that I was playing at like a national level. Like, this is an amazing feat that I felt at the time was like, oh, I can brag about this in my college essay. But although I put it in part of my awards section, I mostly focused on all the experiences I had meeting the different people and being able to have really good conversations in between rounds with all the different opponents, because I felt like that really that was the highlight of my tournament, and therefore that should be the highlight of my essay. So whatever I found really interesting, I just wrote about it, and I think that was a very genuine way and like a very real way to write your essay, or to write my essay. So that was like one of the main extracurriculars I wrote about in my college application. And table tennis is a very common sport, maybe not as much in America, but in the rest of the world, like Great Britain and Asia, like it's a very common sport. Therefore, you might be like, oh, why'd you choose to write about it if it's like, you know, again, such a common thing to do? I think even competing like at a high level for table tennis is not super uncommon, but I think that, again, like just because it's sort of common doesn't mean that the way you write it has to be common. So I think I just wrote about all the different combinations of interactions I have with people, like for example, during a water break, talking to an opponent, of being like, oh, this person plays in this style. Like these kind of small snippets, I sort of added dialogue into my essays, and I also just wrote about just like my general opinion on the entire situation. So that was a main extracurricular. The next one I can talk about is debate. This is a trophy, and it's not first or second place, it's 7th place, right? I got 7th place for the financial literacy debate, and this was during the pandemic in 9th grade, and it was my first ever debate tournament, so that's why I just brought it up. But we were debating like, oh, what are the benefits of a 2-year college versus a 4-year college? And I remember like debating this, and it was really, really fun. And I remember this is like the tournament that really got me into debate. So when I wrote about debate in my application, I mainly focused on what got me into debate, because I think I really enjoyed debate all throughout high school, but my 9th grade year in the pandemic, when I first learned like what debate was as an extracurricular, like that excited me the most. So I just focused on that part of my journey. So some people might focus on 11th grade when they're winning a debate tournament. Like I did go far in a couple of debate tournaments in my like JV, or like I got some, speaker awards in varsity, but I think I mainly focused on my 9th grade experience when I wrote about debate, because it was the most special to me. So emphasizing like time periods can also be good in your essays. And now for the more I think crucial parts of my application, like these two were big extracurriculars I wrote about, but I think what really helped me get into some great universities was research experience. And any kind of work or research experience, honestly, now that I've reflected upon it, is a really good way to stand out, in my opinion, because it shows a lot of maturity and a lot of like responsibility, which you're indirectly telling to colleges like whether it be interning at a hospital or, you know, like for me, I did research in history. So I applied to a program called Pioneer Academics, which I can share about later on in more detail in different videos. But through this program, I worked with a professor named Eleanor Gilbert, and she was a professor of history at the University of Chicago. And we researched in a cohort of about 6 to 7 scholars, and we pretty much, for the first 4 weeks of the program, it's an 8-week summer program, before my senior year. So the first 4 weeks, we basically researched and wrote about all the different topics she introduced to us. So she told us, so it was she basically gave us a lot of like texts to analyze, and they're mostly like cross-cultural texts. Like, how did 15th century Europe affect 15th century Asia? Like stuff like that. Like that's what we're researching. But the last 4 weeks, she basically asked us like, oh, write your own thesis on whatever you want. So then I was like, okay, I mean, so at this point in time, I thought I was gonna major in history, and I really just thought my only interest is history, right? I did like math a bit, but I was like, history's my thing. So it still is something that I wanna study, but this is the process where I learned that I really wanted to major in economics. And this is because as I was researching history, I decided my thesis was gonna be about 19th century America. So this is the 1800s and the late 19th century. So post-Civil War, like post-Reconstruction, kind of like the 1870s, 1880s. And as I was researching, the most influential people were the Vanderbilts, the Rockefellers, the Carnegies, like the robber barons, or they're known as the captains of industry. And when I was researching this, my professor would always send me like financial data sheets of like the 1880s, or like the economic philosophies that Carnegie had in the 1890s, where he talked about rich people are allowed to be rich because they give back to society, like all these different philosophies. And that's when I really like became interested in economics. Now you might be wondering, watching this video, like, why are you telling us like why you like economics? Like this isn't, you know, part of how you get into college. But I think this way of finding interest in econ, I think, was pretty unique, because when I talked about it in my interviews, a lot of my interviewers really liked it, and I wrote about this a lot in my essay. So rather than I like econ because I've liked it my whole life, or I like econ because it leads to a specific job I want to do later, it was more like I like economics because of the research experience I was doing in history, but I somehow found a love for economics within that subject. So this was sort of, in my opinion, a unique way to find your major. So a lot of college essays will ask something like, what do you want to major in and why? Or like, what are some intellectual passions you have and how are you going to pursue them? So now I can be like, oh, like, why do I like economics? I have such a wonderful story to tell, which I just briefly summarized here, but in some of my essays I like had a bit more details of like how I exactly found it out. So that, I think, researching through Pioneer was an amazing experience. I also, the past two to 3 years, have been researching with Professor Ramesh from UCLA, and he mainly goes into like digital studies and like AI ethics. And this, I think, was a pretty relevant piece of research that I did, because as artificial intelligence through ChatGPT or through like image generators is getting stronger, I feel like there's more of a need to have regulation, right? So I think researching is amazing, but another great thing you can write about is if you do action based on the research. So after researching about artificial intelligence and the ethics of like how much we should regulate it and like how much government control there should be, I came to the conclusion that like we need to have like an official digital bill of rights for like artificial intelligence, right? And obviously, I think the Biden administration passed some sort of blueprint for this kind of digital bill of rights, and there are like laws being passed internationally for like how should we regulate AI or how much should we regulate AI. And without getting too political, I made a draft for my AP Gov class, because there's a project like, oh, do some civic engagement. So I thought this is a great opportunity. So I made a draft of about like 7 to 8 amendments of what I think should be regulated on the internet or digitally. And I tried my best to make it so the government wouldn't have too much or like too much control, but I also try to make it so like we can maximize artificial intelligence's potential to sort of help humanity rather than like be an obstacle towards it. So that digital bill of rights I wrote, I went up to my principal, I said, can I please post this around the school board? And then I posted it around like 4 or 5 bulletin boards, and I was able to talk to a couple of my classmates who like saw it while walking around, and we just had some, I guess, a few minutes to talk about it. But I think being able to circulate these kind of ideas and thoughts around my school was really nice. And for a couple of my essays later on in my supplementals, I actually wrote about this. I said, this is what I researched, this is how I took action to like apply my research, and this is what I learned. Like I learned mostly from talking to my classmates. And that essay is pretty simple in the structure, but I think it was really well received with a lot of universities, because a lot of the ones I wrote about this specific process with, I was accepted to. So like in that sense, that's just an example of like what you can write about. It doesn't have to be like you save the world, you cure cancer, like stuff like that. You could just be like, oh, I think a problem right now is that AI is not regulated, or not regulated to the extent it should be. Then how did you solve this problem? I researched it, and then I acted on it by making a potential draft of what the regulation should look like in order to create conversation around my school, basically informing others and learning more myself. Very simple concept, but I think it works out really well in essays. So yeah, that's pretty much everything I wanted to talk about. I have a paper here of like my general script, but I think I rambled a little bit and went off topic. But in conclusion, basically, what I would encourage everyone watching to do is, just like I told like with my story about table tennis, like being able to go to the competition because my aunt lived close by. I was able to talk to all these people and have amazing interactions. Debate, although I enjoyed all of it, I really liked my 9th grade experience of like first being introduced into debate, like showing audiences like how that felt like emotionally. And then for all my researching experiences, like, you know, pioneer, learning how I fell in love with the subject of economics. And then lastly, this AI ethics research, how I applied it and actually did something about it in the real world. It's like all these different extracurriculars I just mentioned, although it's a very long explanation, I think it shows a lot of the core parts of my application that helped me get into these universities. So even if you do a lot of amazing things like being able to do a lot of like research with college professors, I think if you just say like, this is the research I did and that's it, I think it's a bit underwhelming. Like you could have wrote more about it. So that's why I encourage, if you have all these great experiences, try to write it so that it sounds very great as well. So I guess the last thing is that you can also write about mundane things in a sense. I wrote about that wasn't even that amazing. It's just common because a lot of people just like get part-time jobs. It's like working at a Rite Aid next to my house. And I just did this initially to save up some cash for summer, and then like for like maybe trips I wanted to go with friends. But initially, that was my intention, just work like a month. But then I ended up working 9 months at Rite Aid, and that's because I stayed for all the interactions I had with some of the elderly like Korean customers. Like I was able to speak with them in Korean, which I never get to practice Korean, so that was really nice. And then that is also something I kind of wrote about in my essays. So in the end, whatever you do in high school, whatever you make of it, all your life experiences, I think if you write about them in your essays and your extracurricular section, your overall college application, just as kind of a process of, this is what I've did, this is what I've learned, and you kind of show colleges like, this is the potential I have, then I think you'll get accepted to a lot of your top choices. Because colleges, I feel like, really want to know what are your genuine interests and how are you going to pursue them later on. So you don't necessarily have to be the greatest superstar in high school to get into great colleges. You just have to show colleges that you have the potential to become the greatest superstar later on. So that pretty much wraps up this video. If you have any questions on, like specific questions on like, can you talk more about your research experience, or what are some other extracurriculars you did, or how exactly did you write it? Because I didn't go into like super detail. You can write it in the comment section. Also, I'm just gonna attach a link to a website that I self-coded with my dad recently. We were trying to I was trying to create like a professional website, but then it took so long and it was impossible to code because I'm bad at coding. So, but anyway, we're able to finalize it, and I put it in the description of this video. So if you just want to ask any other questions like beyond the comment section, you can click there. There's a Google form where you can write about like, can you just tell me more, or can you help me on this essay topic? Like, how should I articulate this story into an essay? Like, I'll be very happy to like respond back. So you can check out the website link, and if you scroll through it, there should be one thing that says, there should be a link to a Google form that allows you to like communicate. So yeah, that officially wraps up the video, and I will be posting hopefully more frequently. So thank you for tuning in.